Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be around the world, and welcome to another Agency Success live stream from hosting.com. My name is Nathan Ingram, and I'm the agency trainer here at in our Agency Success program, and super excited to be talking to you today about one of my favorite topics, which is dealing with problem clients. Now, if you work with clients at all, it is very likely that you have experienced a problem with the client. And you get a group of agency owners together, and there's always going to be a few horror stories that are told about the different problem clients that we've encountered. And I'm just seeing in the chat that it seems like our link is wrong for our slide. So I apologize for that. Let me double check and get that link for you real quick. I can get that moving for you right here. Okay, so that link in the chat is the correct slide deck. Thank you, class, for catching that. And we will, you should all be able to download the slide deck at that Google Drive link in the chat now. So I've been working for many years with clients. I started working with clients 30 years ago this year. So since 1995, I've been working with clients doing web things. And I've also been a growth coach for micro agency owners since 2014. So more than 10 years of coaching conversations with folks that are working with clients as well. And what I can tell you is there's a constant thing that I hear, and that is folks that are just tired of dealing with problem clients. Matter of fact, there are many folks that I've talked to that are just one more bad client away from throwing in the towel in their business. And if that's you today, I want you to know that you're not alone, that it is very complicated and very frustrating many times to work with clients who are creating problems. Now, the good news is that most, maybe not all, but most problems that are related to working with clients can be solved or at least mitigated by good systems and processes. And that's what we're going to talk about kind of as the big picture today, as we try to deal with how do I handle clients that are creating issues in my business. So again, if you're just joining us in Zoom, delighted to have you here. I'm going to drop in once again the link to download the slides. That's a Google Drive link waiting on you there in the chat. And we will, we had that incorrect link earlier, so sorry about that. Now, when it comes to working with problem clients, what I'll tell you is that I am absolutely an expert, at least by the definition of Dr. Niles Bohr, who says an expert is someone who has found out by his own painful experience all of the mistakes that one can make in a very narrow field. So as far as being an expert is concerned, I am absolutely an expert when it comes to dealing with problem clients, because I've done this the wrong way for many, many years. I've lost a lot of sleep. I've given away time that really should have belonged to my family and to myself, all to settle issues created by problem clients. I've come close to throwing in the towel myself because of difficult clients that are just consuming too much headspace and making my work miserable. So hopefully, over the course of the next few minutes, what I'll be able to share with you are the lessons that I've learned in dealing with problem clients. Now, here's where we're going to be going in this talk. The first thing I want to do is just talk about this concept of friendly monsters. So I consider clients, all clients, to be friendly monsters, and we'll unpack that idea for just a minute. Then we'll move into the first section, which is 4 fences. So the idea of this talk is clients are friendly monsters. We need to keep them fenced in. And there are 4 fences that we need to build in order to protect our businesses from the potential of harm from problem clients. And then toward the end, we'll move into 4 monsters that you need to know, friendly monsters, and you've probably met many of them if you've been working with clients. And then how to contain them using the strategies that we talked about in building our fences. And if there's time, we might even get to 5 monsters. We'll see how that goes. So let's talk about this whole idea of clients are friendly monsters. Now, if you've been working with clients for any length of time, this term might resonate with you. There's a lot of clients that are wonderful, friendly people, but all of them have the potential to transform into a monster. And so my encouragement is that all of us need to be working on how to build fences or systems in our business to protect us from friendly monsters, to keep those monsters contained in the boundaries that we create. If we don't do that, we're going to end up wasting time, wasting money, and wasting emotional capital on dealing with the issues that these problem clients are going to bring us. Now, there's at least 4 fences or 4 boundaries that we need to have that are reflected in the systems and processes in our business. The first of those, and we're going to unpack each of these a little more in just a moment. The first of those fences is clarity. The second is commitment, a series of commitments that we're going to ask our client to make. The third is communication. And the fourth is documentation. Now, these are 4 fences. You might find that you need other ones, but at least these 4 need to be present in your business in one way or another. And it could look differently for each of us, depending on how our business is structured. But these 4 fences, in one way or another, must be present in our business in order to keep our friendly monsters contained. And it's critical that we do that because every monster has the potential for transformation. Even friendly monsters have teeth. And so that's why we have to keep them fenced in with good boundaries in our business so we keep them from running all over the rest of our world. So let's talk about this first fence, which is the fence of clarity. Now, when you start thinking about clarity, what comes to mind? And how can we get to clarity with our clients? And what does that even mean? The first thing I would suggest is that agreement with our client doesn't automatically equal clarity. The most common reason I think that our relationship with our clients can tend to suffer is a lack of clarity. And we have to be real careful about that. Like the client's thinking one thing and we're thinking another, and there's not clarity on expectations or who's going to do what or what the end product is going to be. And we have to be really careful about this because even if the client agrees with us, they may not fully understand what we're saying. There can be agreement without clarity. There's just no meeting of the minds. Now, a lot of times this is because we might be using, as professional web people, we might be using technical jargon that muddies the water. And you may be talking about these different things about the technology you're using to build the website or things you're doing with SEO or digital marketing in another vein or whatever. And they're nodding their head up and down like they understand because they don't want to admit they don't know what this means. And so you think they're agreeing, but maybe they're really not. And this happens a lot when we're dealing with anything technical and a person who may be not so technical. And then another place where clarity suffers is that sometimes the client doesn't tell us everything. And maybe you've gotten into this with a client where you're halfway into a project and the client's like, well, where are my customers supposed to log in and check their account? Wait a minute, we didn't talk about any of this. And so there are some times that clients have expectations that they haven't clearly articulated to us. And when those things happen, whose fault is it? Like, it's real easy for us to think that's the client's fault and we blame the problem client and we have another terrible client story to tell. When in reality, maybe it's more equally split. Maybe it's more 50-50 whose fault that is. Because as professional web developers and people running agencies, one of the best skills that we can create and develop in ourselves is the ability to ask really good questions so that we can unpack what it is the client is expecting and get to clarity. That skill can set you apart from others who are doing the same thing that you're doing. Learn to ask great questions. Never make assumptions. Keep asking questions one after another until you finally get down to clarity. And that can often take a series of questions to really unpack what it is the client wants. But never make assumptions because assumptions always create confusion. A lack of clarity comes when we assume that the client understands or is going to do things, or the client assumes that we understand what they want and what we're going to do. And so it's a good practice that as you're thinking through, even in the first conversation with a client, or as you're creating a proposal with a scope of work, what is the client assuming that you're going to do? And what are you assuming that the client is going to do? And make sure those things are very, very clear, both in your conversation and in your written documents. So, look at the processes that you have for all of these things, for onboarding a client, for creating proposals, for asking questions about, what this web project is going to be and do. And where are the assumptions that are in that process? Every project that you take on as a web professional is an opportunity to uncover more assumptions and improve clarity and strengthen your fences. So we have to start being really specific in order to get to clarity. And some of the ways that I've learned to do that is in a really clear discovery process where we're asking a set of questions to the client every single time so that we're very clear about what it is the client is expecting us to do. What is it they really want out of their website and what the website is going to do and the role it's going to play in their business. And that transforms into a very clear scope of work. And this is the scope of work is one of the most common places where clarity gets mixed up. So that's we be very clear on our scope of work. And one of the most common places that happens is the content of the website. Like who's gonna be providing all the words and how is that going to work? Because the client may assume you're going to do it, and you may assume the client is going to do it. And these are just conversations that have to happen so that we understand who's responsible for what in the course of this project. And of course, a great contract is absolutely critical. So the client is clear on how your process works and what happens in a scenario where they delay the project for one reason or another, or what happens if the client doesn't pay on time. What happens if you want to fire the client or if they want to fire you? All of these things need to be clear, and your contract is the best tool to do that. So clarity, absolutely, it's absolutely critical when you're looking at these fences that help keep our problem clients contained. Now, if we don't have a good, strong fence of clarity, the client's going to make assumptions and they tend to assume the worst. All right, let's look at that second fence, and it's the fence of commitments. Now, when you think about commitments, healthy relationships, any kind of healthy relationship, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a marriage relationship, whether it's a client relationship, family relationships, all healthy relationships are based on clear commitments. And I wonder, it took me a little while to realize that I need to start thinking about my client relationships in terms of commitment, just like I do the other relationships in my life. For me, for years, especially in those early days, for me, if the client committed to signing the deposit check and I got paid, that was all the client needed to do. I was ready to put on my Superman cape and just do whatever I had to do to get it done and sacrifice whatever I needed to do to get the job done and just push through until the work was done. I really just wanted the client to write the check. And that worked for a little while until I started doing more work and I started getting clients that wanted more and more and more. And I realized, wait a minute, this is going to require some cooperation. The client is going to have to commit to do some things in this project too. And so the client needs clarity on the commitments that they're going to be asked to make. And so what I encourage folks to do is to design their processes. Your process for building a website, for example, that includes opportunities for the client to make commitments at key points. Because when you get the client to make commitments and sign off at key points, it helps keep the project on track. It helps prevent the client from coming back later and changing all the things that you've done in the project so far. And one of the ways I like to visualize this is in terms of a board game. And now, by the way, the next Agency Success live stream, which is on Systems Equals Success. I'm going to drop the link for that there in the chat here. You can sign up for that now. We're going to unpack this concept even more, but I just want to give you a quick visual on how commitments can look to help keep our problem clients contained. And so here's our little friendly monster here. And this is a little board game that represents a website project. And when the client first comes in and it's the first time we have contact with them, what does that process look like for you? And there should be certain questions that you're asking, and some consistent things to get clarity, like we talked about earlier. But from there, we're going to move into an actual discovery call where we ask the client a bunch of questions and try to get, again, more clarity on what the project is going to be. And then we ask for our first big commitment, right? The first big commitment from the client is, I'm going to need you to sign these documents, a proposal and a contract, and I'm going to need a check. Now, we don't move forward at all thinking about anything else until we get those contracts and documents and deposits signed, right? So we've committed some time to the client to create these documents, to spend some time understanding their project. We've given them some things. Now we're going to ask them for some things, right? So it's this back and forth, reciprocal commitment, back and forth. And that's really the big picture here. My processes need to look like back and forth commitments, shared commitments in the context of this project. So if they make the big commitment to sign off on the documents, we'll move into the content phase. We've gotten paid and they've agreed to our process. And so we'll do some work to figure out what the content is going to be for the website, the content architecture, and then the words, creating all of those things, whether the client helps with that or not. There'll be some back and forth. But before we move to the next step, the client is going to agree that the content is ready, right? I learned a long time ago that we start with content first before we even move into design, because oftentimes content changes are going to affect design changes, right? They cause design changes. So we want the client to sign off and make a commitment that this content is indeed complete. And if they do, we'll move into the design phase and we'll create a visual rendering of what the website looks like through one tool or another. And before we move on any further, we get sign off and commitment that, yes, the design is good. So before we move into development, the client has agreed that the design is good. That's what we want to do. So then we build it out in development, right? Now, pausing for a minute, why is this important? We're asking for commitments from the client and we're moving the project forward. We don't want to go backwards, right? This helps us keep our work efficient and it helps us, avoid having to undo a lot of work because the client drops a bomb on us that we weren't expecting. They have a whole other area, a whole other set of content or a big change in their logo or colors or whatever. They've signed off on it. So if we go backwards in this little board game, it's going to cost money, and that is explained in our contract. So every step of the way, see, there's these different phases where the client is giving commitment that, yes, it's good. This is what we want. So before launch, they'll have a time to give revisions and make an approval. And then we'll launch the website, right? So again, it's back and forth with commitments. We're doing some work. You're approving the work. We're going to do some more work based on that. You're going to approve that. And then hopefully we move the client into a long-term website management relationship. Now, this is just one example of the principle of what commitments can look like as a fence that helps keep problem clients contained. And the idea here is we want to regularly define the expectations of where we are in this step and the commitment that we need from the client and the implications of, if we have to go backwards, it's going to cost more, or we can't move forward until we get this approval, right? So this commitment, this principle of commitments is baked into the process. So we're going back and forth. And we have to remind the client of this at strategic points in the development process. When we get to a commitment point where we're asking them to sign off, we have to remind them that this is where we are in the project and we don't go forward until this is approved, and make sure this is correct and what you want before we go any further. Now, this should be in the contract, but it should also be verbally if we're on a call with the client or an email reminder. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but it needs to be consistent communication about the commitments that we're going to ask the client to make. If you do this, we do that. If you don't do this, then we don't do that. And we have to do it constantly, clearly and regularly, because one thing I've learned over the years is that you can tell some clients the same thing 100 times and they don't stay told. We have to remind them of these things. So that's our defense of commitments. We've talked about getting clarity. We've talked about baking in commitments as really just an integral part of every process you have. Now let's move to the third fence, which is communication. George Bernard Shaw said that the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has occurred. And I think what Shaw was saying was that we fool ourselves, that we've communicated well enough, or maybe we think we've communicated and we really haven't communicated well at all. Now, I'll tell you, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that there are few things that can improve the client's experience more than clear, consistent communication. We talked about learning how to ask good questions earlier, and this is another one of those soft skills that every developer ought to have, and that is good communication. If you become great at communicating with your clients, both during and after the project, that is going to set you apart from other agency owners, from other developers. It would surprise you just how poor communication can be with others who are doing the things that we do. And if we get good at this, it's going to endear our clients to us. Just last week, I was having a conversation with a client who was considering an SEO strategy. This is an attorney who is a solo practitioner. He has a solid referral program. He's really, like when we began to build the site, probably almost 2 years ago now, we were very clear. He was very clear that he didn't want to generate leads from search results. He wasn't interested in being, top listing of this particular kind of law in his particular area. What he wanted was that when somebody typed his name in, he would show up and have a good, beautiful, credible website that would just show people he was serious about, what he did, and it would give him credibility. Now, we talked all about that in the beginning. We built the site that way. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And then all of a sudden, I get an email from the client that says, I'm really thinking about doing SEO and whatever. And so we schedule a call and we talk through it about what his needs were. And he left, throughout the call, he was absolutely certain that he was a little concerned even that his site wasn't getting the traffic that he wanted. And I just simply reminded him, when we built the site, one of the things we talked about throughout the project was that you didn't want to generate leads as from search results as your primary way of finding new clients. Because if you know anything about SEO, getting attorneys ranked is very, very difficult. It's incredibly competitive. They'll spend thousands of dollars on AdWords and ads from Google. It's very, very expensive, very, very difficult. And in fact, as a solo practitioner, he didn't really even have the time to sort through the bad leads that would inevitably come in for different types of cases that he was looking for. And I reminded him of that. And, here's the email that I got after we finished that call. Now, these are his words. He said, "Thanks, Nathan, for your time this morning, and thanks for the reminder about my initial stated purpose for the website, to establish credibility. I think I was temporarily suffering from some Google envy." Now, look, if he wanted to do SEO, would we have helped him? Of course. But it was it was a good moment for communication to remind him of why the site is built the way it is, and what his goals were, and have those goals changed? Did he want to get a whole bunch of more leads, or what was going on there? And simply asking good questions and reminding him of what we had talked about before brought him back, zoned him back in on what the purpose was for the website. Now, in the past, I would have gotten super anxious about this. Am I going to lose this client or whatever? And instead, I've learned to replace that with just communicating clearly about, what are his expectations? What are ours? What can we do? How can we help? This kind of communication can save a client and win clients that are considering you. Now, as we talk about communication, one thing I've learned from working for many years, 11 plus years now in doing coaching with agency owners, is that naturally, this is a place where many of us struggle. We struggle with good communication. And so as a result, we don't do it very well. We just don't communicate. And what I've learned in my own experience and from coaching others is that without consistent communication, clients make assumptions and they tend to assume the worst. That's just human nature. If you're not talking to people, they make assumptions, and their assumptions are generally not great. So just think about this. Be honest. If you are working on a project and you hit a problem of some sort, let's just say you're building an e-commerce site and you run into trouble getting WooCommerce connected to, like oh gosh, what's the biggest nightmare? The Federal Express shipping connector. That thing is horrible. And so you hit a problem, right? Now, is your first inclination to update the client on where you are and things are taking a little bit longer, or is your first inclination to go hide in a cave and try to solve the problem and hope the client doesn't email you? Probably most of us are on that second one. But what I'll tell you is that is very likely exactly the opposite of what we ought to be doing. Even if we're hitting a struggle in a web project, clear, regular communication is better. So what I suggest is that we all become masters of what I call the weekly email strategy. Now, this came originally from my friend Erin Flynn, who is a brilliant content creator. She calls it the Friday email. She does it at the end of the week. I now call it the weekly email because you could do it really anytime. Sometimes Fridays aren't the best because people don't read their email on Friday. But just a weekly email to every active project that you have going on. It should be short and simple. 3 sentences: past, present, future. Past, this is what we did on your project this week. Present, this is where we are now in terms of the whole project. Future, this is what we're going to be working on next week. And if you have any questions or concerns, just let us know, right? It should be quick, take you a minute to write this at the most. But this is the place to explain if you've had any problems. So, dear Mrs. Client, we're working on your shop. This week we worked on getting the FedEx connector connected like you wanted. We hit a few problems. We're going to try to work those out next week, but it might, add another few days to our projected project plan if you have one of those, that sort of thing, right? You don't have to overshare, but just bring the client in. If you have any questions or concerns, just let us know. Invite communication. That the clients love this, and it's a great way to keep them involved in the process. This email is also the place to say, hey, we're waiting on your approval for the content, or hey, we're still waiting on your draft text for your about page, and we really can't do anything else on your project until we receive that content, right? It's the place to communicate delays and problems, but just having this in place as a process is critical. Clear, regular communication has to be part of one of those fences. So the weekly email strategy is a great place to do that. Now, the last fence is the fence of documentation. Because if you don't document, you're relying on your own memory, or worse, the client's. Now, I hope you're documenting any code that you're writing. We've gotten better and better at that. We still have a long way to go in my agency on excellent documentation, but we're getting better at it. And you should do the same kind of documentation when you're talking about client communication. And that's really what I'm focused on here. We need, as agency owners, we need to get used to communicating with our clients in writing. Now, the reason for that is written communication is referenceable, because there are some clients that just won't remember decisions that you've made. So if you're on a Zoom call with a client, or you're meeting with them on the phone or in person, and if a decision about something in the project is made verbally, always email the client to confirm. And we need to have somewhere that's capturing all of those things, where you can capture all of your project information. And I recommend it be someplace other than just your email, because inevitably, some little piece of information that's critical to the project, a decision that was made or whatever, is going to be 18 levels deep in some long chain email with a subject line that has nothing to do with this decision, right? So some other place, a project management system, I mean, you can do, it doesn't, the software itself doesn't matter other than you're using it consistently. And I often get that question, like, what should I use for project management? And there are many dozens of different good apps out there that you could use, but the best one is the one that you personally will use consistently. Pick the one you hate the least, right? And just use it consistently. and make sure you're tracking those decisions. In our project management app, my email app allows me to grab a URL for a particular email, and I drop that into the documentation if there's a significant decision that's made, or I'll just document it right there in the discussion on that project for that date, right? So it's there. If we need to find it, it's going to be there. So let's quick review here. We've seen that clients are friendly monsters, and we've learned that we need to build 4 fences around them to keep them contained. Those fences are clarity, commitments, communication, and documentation. Now, I want to give you one more little note before we get into meeting the monsters themselves, and that is this encouragement. Don't tear down your own fences. Hey, what do I mean by that? This is really important advice if you are a nice person. Okay. If you are a nice person and you tend, and you know you do this, you tend to let clients weasel out of commitments that they've made. I do this. Or maybe you make excuses in your mind for a client in order to avoid confrontation about one of these fences with a client. And you say, well, it's really not that big of a deal that they decided to do this, or, they're paying me good money, so I'm just going to go with the flow, or, I'll just kind of do it this time. It'll be better next time. And we pat ourselves on the back for good customer service, but there's a problem. We've built fences. We have a process, and then the client breaks the rules. And if your tendency is to be nice and just give them another chance, what I'm telling you here is you can hold a client nicely to their commitment and still be a nice person to them. You can do that. Don't break your own rules. Don't tear down your own fences. Those fences exist for a reason. Now, let me explain why this is important. There's some insanity that goes on about this. If let's just say a client does something or emails you, whatever it is, and it's outside your system and they know better, and I don't want to have confrontation. I just want to get it done, whatever. You just do it and you're done with it, right? Fine. And then something happens. This feeling starts right here in my chest if it happens to me. And I start feeling a little tense, get a little frustrated, and I realize this client knows better. They treat me, they're not treating me fairly and whatever. I just get more and more frustrated about this until the end of the day comes. And then I go upstairs and I'm short with my wife and I say something mean to my dog or whatever. And now I'm just mean to everybody in my life. And what the insanity of this is that I end up being nice to the client and mean to everybody else in my life. So instead of letting essentially a stranger live with the consequences of the actions which they've earned, we end up taking it out on the people closest to us. And that is insanity. So that's why we need to have good fences to protect us many times from our own selves and these problem clients that can tend to want to break out of our fences. So don't tear down your own fences. Let's talk a little bit about these 4 monsters that you ought to know and how to contain them. Now, by the way, there are great clients out there, and I want to be careful to say that, especially if my clients are watching this video for some reason. I have excellent clients. They're wonderful. But there are also some terrible, terrible clients out there that don't care about you. They don't care about treating you fairly, and they will absolutely walk all over you if you let them. And that's why we have to build fences. The importance, it is critically important to do the upfront work of building fences so that these misbehaving clients don't trample over the rest of your life. Now, here's the first one of these friendly monsters I want you to meet. Now, this is what I've called the invisible man. And by the way, all of these monsters are gender neutral. There's no gender really associated with these. There are plenty of invisible women if they are men or whatever else, right? Anyway, so if you ever meet the invisible man, you'll know it. Here are some of the prints that this monster leaves behind if you encounter them. You'll know you're dealing with an invisible man if this person expresses interest a lot and then they disappear. Poof, they're gone. Like it's email, call, whatever. and then poof, they're gone. You don't hear from them again. Or it's like weeks before they reply to the 8 emails that you sent them or whatever. Or for that initial discovery call, if they reschedule over and over, or if they just take forever to respond to emails that you're sending to them. Like, you send somebody an email and you've been talking, and an email probably ought to come right back, and then it's like 3 days later. These delays are monster prints, the paw prints of the invisible man. Now, these folks are everywhere, and we encounter them a lot if you're working with clients. And what I've learned about these folks is that they're usually good people. They're well-intentioned. They're just busy. And when they're reaching out to you and they're hot, lots of questions, move, and then they're cold. When they're hot, the project is the top priority on their list, but they're juggling 100 things. And then all of a sudden they go quiet because now the project is not on their top priority, or one of their other 10 top priorities is taking their attention. Now, what we have to learn about the invisible man is that this person doesn't change after they've signed the contract. And I have this fallacy in my head. I'm not sure why I ever thought this, but somehow I thought that, well, this person is taking a while to respond, or, it took them 2 weeks to sign the proposal for whatever reason, or, it's taken them forever to get back with me, or they've rescheduled twice on this call. I thought, well, I just had this idea in my head that once they sign the proposal and give us a deposit, that all that would change and they would just be incredibly responsive. I have no idea why I thought that. But they don't change. If anything, they can oftentimes get worse because in their mind, they've kind of checked off, hey, I've got the website project started. Boom, it's now the monkey is on your back as a web developer. And so sometimes they can even take longer after they get started with the project. And sometimes that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially when you're busy too, and you can do pieces of the work and then kind of press pause on that project and do other work. It's the web developer juggle, right? I think we all do that. But the problem with the invisible man comes when what I call the invisible man transforms into the stealth bomber. They appear out of nowhere and they drop bombs all over your world, expecting you to have this project done in 2 days, and they haven't responded to you for 6 months. It's when they disappear during a project and then reappear with unreasonable demands. Now, I used to get so frustrated at these clients. Anybody have one of these folks? Have you met the invisible man? Let me hear from you in the chat. I used to get so frustrated with these clients, and I would think, why are they doing this to me? And the answer for that is because I let them do this to me. And that's why it's critical to have the containment strategy of clarity throughout your processes. You've got to have clear wording in your contract that describes projects that are delayed by the client. Like sometimes delays are inevitable, like they're just going to happen, but we need to have that accounted for in our documents and in explanations with the client. We got to make sure the client understands the process, both in the contract and in verbal reminders. We need to have good policies that are expressed in our contract about what happens when a project is suspended or abandoned. And when you detect an invisible man, you see those prints of the invisible man showing up, we remind them of what our policies are about, well, your project is now on pause, and it'll be unpaused when we receive these things from you. Or if it's been a long time, maybe there's some additional things that happen if the project is suspended. We have to stick to our policies on this. Otherwise, we're going to encourage the invisible man to misbehave even further, and we end up creating our own monster here. Now, something else I've learned in dealing with the invisible man is that clarity, incredibly important when a delay happens, because when a project delays, the likelihood of scope creep increases, and the likelihood of their expectations changing increases. Let's say they take, it's 6 months before they can get back to the project. Well, it's very unlikely that the exact same set of circumstances are present in their business that their website was trying to solve. It's very likely some things are going to have to change. That's why we just have to be expecting this and let them know, when you come back on and we're going to reactivate your project, we need to reassess the scope of work and just let's make sure everything still lines up. There might need to be an increase of cost or whatever. We just have to acknowledge that when there's a delay, many things change. And that doesn't mean you have to charge the same thing that you were charging before. Scope creep equals price creep. And the invisible man just needs to be reminded of that. All right, the second monster is the question mark. And here are the monster prints that you will often notice when you're dealing with a question mark. Now, the question mark has no idea what they want, or they want everything. They ask questions all the like they're just full of questions. They want to understand, they want to know, they want to get to the bottom, they want to investigate. It's great. The problem is oftentimes they have no goals and no budget for what their project needs to be. That's what makes these folks a little difficult to work with. So when you're dealing with a question mark, how do you address them? Well, the containment strategy for the question mark is commitment. And what I'll tell you is, if you're trying to be nice to a question mark, the question mark will, you will invest hours in this person before they ever consider making a commitment back to you. You will answer questions and questions, and you'll have email conversations. You'll have multiple coffee appointments. They will just want to pick your brain. They love that term. Like, can I pick your brain about this? And whatever, right? So they're just full of questions. So we've got, when you deal with a question mark, we have to focus on the fence of commitment. Now, one of the most effective things you can do out of the gate is requiring a discovery form. There's no brain picking until they complete the discovery form, right? So what am I doing? I'm asking for them to make a commitment before I give a commitment back to them. Like, one of the big mistakes that I see agency owners making is just having an open book a session with me in their email signature, where anybody, every question mark in the world, can just go and grab a time in your life out of your calendar to just book a call and pick your brain. You will end up giving away many hours of your time this way. And so in order for me to give a block of 30 minutes, I mean, what do I charge for an hour? What do you charge for an hour? You're giving that away. It's a gift to the client. They're not paying for it. So I put a discovery form in place first, where they have to answer a bunch of questions before we have a conversation. And many question marks don't want to answer and fill out those forms. And so it really stops a lot of that from coming in. Something else I've learned in dealing with a question mark, the best way to deal with a question mark is with a dollar sign. To work with me, the minimum price is blank. It's funny how that single expression will oftentimes make a question mark stop. In order to go any further, we're going to have a discovery phase, right? Where you continue to ask your questions and we'll answer those, but there's a dollar figure attached to those answers. I've worked many years to develop the wisdom and insight into the web that I have, and I can't just give that away at no cost. When you're having a discovery call with a client, the purpose of that meeting is to gather information to create a proposal, not for them to ask you a million questions. Some questions are perfectly appropriate, but this is not a time to pick my brain. This is a time for me to get answers from you so that I can create a proposal. The rule of thumb that I have for this is what questions are free, how questions cost money, right? So if they're asking what questions, what should we do here? What should this website do? And those questions I'll answer. But any detail, the how we do it questions, that's intellectual property. That costs money. So as you're thinking about the question mark, the discovery phase is an incredibly helpful tool where you're just, you create a consulting agreement where you'll answer their questions for a cost. It's no different than any other project. It's a scope of work with a deliverable and a price. The deliverable happens to be a document that answers their questions. And this is a wonderfully effective way to deal with a question mark. The next monster, this is a fun one. Not so much. These are maybe one of the most annoying friendly monsters. Maybe not even so friendly. This is the boundary buster. Now, the boundary buster, you may have met one of these if you get a 3 a.m. email from them with a 7:30 a.m. follow-up wondering if you've gotten to the work that they sent you in the middle of the night. These are folks that insist on after hours meetings. We got to meet at night or on the weekends. They work weekends and holidays. They expect you to as well. Well, if you're going to work on my team, you're going to have to be available when I need you. This is a boundary buster. And these folks will run roughshod over all of your world if you let them. Now, the containment strategy for the boundary buster is communication. Clear communication is absolutely critical for these folks. Communicating clearly how and when I work. I work on during normal business hours. I don't work on weekends or holidays. If you need me outside of regular hours for a true emergency, it's going to cost more money. So this is super, super important. And the challenge here is often we sometimes create the boundary busters ourselves. And let me tell a hypothetical story. Let's just say that hypothetically, I'm sitting around one night, it's 8 p.m., and I'm watching my favorite show, and I'm sitting in my comfortable recliner, and I just happen to have my laptop open. I used to do that a lot. I don't do that as much anymore. Or maybe I'm looking at my phone, email pops in, it's from a client, it's a quick question, or it's just a quick change to their website. And so, I log in. It's like they want to add a picture. We just swatch out a picture. Takes me like 3 minutes to do. Done. Great. Email the client. Hey, got it done. No problem. Pat myself on the back for good customer service. But what have I just done? I have told this client that I work at 8 p.m. at night, that if they email me with a request, they can expect me to see it and do it almost immediately. I have just created a monster. And as Doris just said in the chat, yes, I just tore down my own fence. Sometimes we create these boundary busters by ourselves, and we turn a friendly client into a friendly monster, or maybe a monster altogether. We've just fed the mogwai after midnight, and it's become a gremlin. So what do we do here? We set the tone in the initial meetings for how and when we work and how and when we follow up. And then I just don't violate those boundaries. These are my boundaries that keep me sane, that keep my family together and healthy. And I don't violate those boundaries. Now, the thing about the boundary buster is they will test every single one of your fences. They'll try every little slat in that fence to see if there's a weakness to slip through, because they love to bust the boundaries. So don't violate your boundaries. And by the way, this is an excellent candidate for what I call a PETA surcharge. That's the pain in the asterisk surcharge, where if I decide to work with this person, I'm going to charge them extra because it's going to have to be worth it. Right. And these days, I rarely take these types of folks anymore. And sometimes, by the way, if you have a client that transforms into a boundary buster, sometimes you have to fire the client. Just make sure this scenario is covered in your contract, because a boundary buster can become irate if you try to remove them from your world. All right, the next monster, the fourth, is the drama queen. Again, I've met plenty of drama kings in my life too. This is not necessarily a gender thing, but let's look at their monster prints. I have one coaching client that used to call these folks her diva clients. They just had to have all the attention and whatever. You're dealing with a drama queen if when you talk to them, everything is an emergency. It's got to be done now. That's their favorite word, now. And they use lots of exclamation points in their emails. Or this is the big red flag. They worked with another developer before who did everything wrong. Those are words that if they come out of a potential client's mouth, what I do and what I encourage you to do is slam on the brakes. Full stop. Let's talk about this. I want to understand what it was about this previous relationship that didn't work. And a lot of times it may be they really had a previous bad developer. I have taken on enough rescue projects in my world to know that there are some really awful, like really bad developers out there who do things that, like, I just scratch my head of thinking, why would anyone do this technically to a website, right? And there's others where they just don't respond or they disappeared, or like it happens. But I'm going to find out. I'm going to dig in. I'm going to ask a series of questions to find out what happened with that previous developer, because it could be, it's an equal chance that they may have really come across a poor developer and it was a bad experience. But it could also be that this is a person who can never be pleased. No matter what you do or how much you give, they will always want more. And everything is drama, and their stuff is always more important than everybody else's. And if you don't weed this person out early in your process, they're going to be complaining to some other developer up the road later about you and how you were an awful developer they couldn't work with. So just when you hear that, like, slam on the brakes and let's ask some questions, because there are clients out there who view life this way, and it's unfortunate. Now, when you're dealing with a drama queen, the most important thing to focus on is documentation. You've got to stick to your system and document the decisions and commitments along the way. One thing that I've learned is that system beats drama. The drama queen can drama all over the world if they want to, but you stick to your system and stick to the facts. The contract says this is what we agreed to. This is what you said on this day and time. You just stick to the facts. System beats drama. When we keep good records, when the drama queen changes their mind frequently and they forget all the previous decisions they've made, we can refer back to that. And it's fine if they want to change, if you want to accommodate that, but there's going to be an extra cost, right? So this is a person that can consume a lot of your emotional energy. So either don't let them in the fences to begin with, or if you do, stick to documentation. It's critical because they will forget every decision that they ever make. All right, one more here. We'll give you the bonus monster. This is the penny pincher. And maybe you've met a penny pincher. You'll know it by these marks. The penny pincher wants an $8,000 site for $1,000. They are overly concerned about cost. Now, good clients are concerned about cost too, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's when they're concerned about cost and you pick up a disrespect, right? They don't respect you. They don't respect, well, I could do this if I wanted to myself, but I thought I'd just try to hire somebody or whatever. Or my nephew could do this for, $500 or whatever. Penny pinchers, good clients want to be fair with you. They want a win-win situation. The penny pincher doesn't respect you. They only want what's good for them, and they want a win-lose. And those are the clients I just don't like to work with. Or they want to pay you in equity. Anybody had that happen? They've got this great idea, and they want to bring you in on the ground floor, and you build the website, and they'll give you some sweet deal on the other end. Like they'll give you 10% of the profits or whatever. Oh, goodness. Equity deals, my friends. Over the years, I've made the mistake of getting involved in a few of those. I've been working with clients on the web for 30 years. 30 years. And I have not had one single equity deal ever work out, period. None. None have ever worked out. And so the way I have to remind myself, because I still have this entrepreneurial urge to do these things, what I have to remind myself is what this client is saying is that you want me to invest in a project that you don't even believe in enough yourself to hire me. That's the right perspective on this. Watch out for these folks. They're very difficult to work with. They're going to test every single one of your fences. Got to make sure the scope of work is crystal clear because they'll try to add things later and not pay for it. And look, it's okay to say no to these kinds of clients. They will bleed you dry and consider it a job well done. It is okay to say no to these kinds of bad clients. They are never worth the hassle, and you do not have to work with everyone. All right. Well, let's wrap it up here. Our clients are friendly monsters, so we have to keep them contained. Every one of them has the potential for transformation. So we need to do the hard work of building in a series of fences in our business that show up in lots of different ways that we're bringing in clarity, we're bringing in commitments, we're bringing in communication, we're bringing in documentation. When we do this, we begin to contain the friendly monsters that are in our world. Now, I'll close with this question. How strong are your fences today? Did any one of these 4 fences stick out to you as one that one's kind of weak in my world? And what are some things you could do to start strengthening that fence in your business today? Consider just for a moment, how much better would your business be if you had good fences in place? How much less time would you have to spend dealing with problem clients? And really, more importantly, how much emotional capital would you not have to spend because your problem clients are contained? So if you'll start putting these fences in place, you'll start to see some things change. Because in the end of the day, good fences make great clients. Thanks very much. Hope this was helpful to you. I just want to mention this is a book also. I had someone encourage me to turn this presentation into a book a few years ago, and you can see that on Amazon, and Kindle and paperback at myfriendlymonster.com. I would love to take some questions if any exist. let's talk. So if you have questions you'd like to ask, please drop those in the Zoom Q&A. See a couple there, but I think they were left over from earlier. Yeah. Questions? Mika, question in the chat. Alignment with clarity and our needs. Mika, can you give me a little more context on what you're asking for there?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Hi,
Oh,
Mika.
thank you. So the clarity is wonderful in one single word, but as a client, we sort of have this idea of what we want our website to do, and the challenge is how to be understood so that we're on the same page with the developer, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Thank you for that. Um, I'm going to move you back to attendee, and I'll try to answer that
Thank
question.
you.
It's a wonderful question. So, from the client's perspective, what does clarity look like? And this is where I think a lot of this falls on us as web developers to ask the questions that are necessary so that we understand what you're looking for. And for a lot of folks, especially just starting out in web development, it's common to make a bunch of assumptions about what the website ought to be and do and look like and those sorts of things. But a good web developer is going to stop and really start asking not even about the website itself. There's a whole series of questions that I like to ask that start with, help me understand your business and what is the role of this website in the business, and what are the outcomes, business outcomes that you want from this website itself, and really begin to understand how the website fits in as a tool for your bigger marketing goals. And from that helps us to understand and make some recommendations on how best to build a website to achieve those goals. So does that help a little bit, Mika? If you can answer there in the chat, I'm going to move on to Steve's question. Great question here from Steve. What are some good resources to look at and create a good onboarding form and documentation? Steve, I'm so glad that you asked that. And what I will tell you is I'm pulling up the date now. We're going to have a live stream all about that. It's going to be on September the 30th. So it's about 2 months away. But actually, I'm going to be doing a whole live stream on confident consultations, where I'm going to actually give you a great starting list of questions, just like what I started suggesting to Mika a minute ago, to talk through not only just what do you need forms on your website, those sorts of questions, but really asking bigger picture questions about the business and its goals and so forth, to have a good checklist of questions to ask. So that's coming up. We don't have even a registration ready for that yet because it is still 2 months away. But if you'll stay, make sure you're on our agency success email list. We'll make sure you are reached, that you get that information. You can, if you're not also joining the agency success Slack channel, that is also a great way to stay involved. I just dropped our link bundle back in the chat now. You'll find the agency success Slack join link there at the bottom, myagencysuccess.com. That'll put you on our mailing list to hear about upcoming live streams, as well as get you the link to join the Slack channel. Oh, that's great, Mika. Thank you. Other questions that I may have missed, drop those in the Zoom Q&A or in the chat. All right. Are the slides available? Yes. Thank you, Auxilium. Let me copy once again those. I gave out the wrong link at the beginning. Let me give you the right link now, and it is now in the chat. That Google Drive link will let you download the slide deck. Elaine, oh boy, yeah. Clients who are slow to pay. So this is such a great question, and I'm actually going to stop sharing here. So this is such a great question, and it's something that if you've been doing web for any length of time, it's likely you've encountered a client who has payment issues. And my encouragement to you, again, we're going to design a process that helps us deal with these sorts of things, right? So what would a process look like that could eliminate or at least greatly decrease slow payments. So the idea is, well, I've done all this work and I want to get paid for it. Well, tie the payment to the work so that you're not moving forward and doing more work until the client has paid the previous bit. So it used to be that I would work on half up front, half when we finish and launch, right? And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, except, you know, we do a bunch of work and then now we're waiting on the client to provide content, or they're waiting on some approvals or whatever. And it's 9 months later and we're still waiting to get paid. Well, why am I struggling with that? I created the process that made the payment structure that way. So I'm going to create something different. It's my business, right? So there's a few options. You could do progress payments based on approvals. So half up front, maybe 25% when the design is approved before you start development. So by the time you start development, you're 75% paid. And then the final 25% before launch. That's a way to do it that would bring down some of the, you're at least paid more. Another way to do it is to tie the payments to time, not deliverables. So, half up front, 25% 30 days after that, 25% 30 days after that. So if the project is delayed for 6 months waiting on content, you're paid in full. So there's ways, and I'm not suggesting that either one of those is exactly correct for your situation, but those are examples of I get to design the process to deal with these things, right? So what does a process look like where I'm not getting frustrated about not being paid? So does that help, Elaine? All right. Davude, will this be released as a recording? Yes, absolutely. So Corey, are you still here? Can you drop
Yes, sir.
in the YouTube channel link in the chat?
Right now.
Yeah. So there's a YouTube playlist of all of our agency success live streams. It takes a little bit for post-production, but it'll be up in the next, 3 or 4 days at least. But yes, the recording will be available. Thanks for that question, Davude. Douglas, when your client is an organization, oh, this is good. When your client is an organization, how can you ensure that you're dealing with someone who can actually make the commitment? Douglas, thank you for asking this question. We'll actually address this more deeply in a live stream that I have probably going to be next year, but it's working with nonprofits and dealing with clients that have committees and boards and whatever. And it's this very issue that's at stake. So Douglas, one of the first questions that's in the list of things, if I'm dealing with an organization, is what is your decision-making process like and who is the final decision maker? Because, I'll deal with, a lower level person to get the information about the project, but I want to present the proposal to the decision maker because nobody is going to be able to better articulate my work than I am. And so this is part of the deal, right? Again, this is one of the commitment things. If I'm going to put in the time to understand your project and to create a proposal, so, between the discovery call and writing the proposal and the back and forth, it's 2 or 3 hours oftentimes, right? So if I'm going to invest, and let's just say you charge $150 an hour, you've just invested $450 of your time in this client who hasn't made any commitment back to you yet. And we have to think about our time that way. So in order for me to write the proposal and give this client the proposal, part of the deal is I've got to present this to the decision maker. I have to. We can do it quickly. We could wrap it up in 20 minutes unless they have longer questions. But it's a deal breaker if I can't present the proposal to the person who's going to make the decision. It's not worth it to me to just be one of 50 proposals sitting in a pile on somebody's desk. Does that help, Douglas? And ultimately, the quick answer to your question is, how do you ensure you're dealing with someone who can actually make the commitment? You got to ask. Yeah, you got to ask and then say, it's our policy that we only present proposals to the person who can make the decision. Douglas, if there's more about that that you want to hit, just drop it in the chat. It's a great question. Let me scroll back up here. Mika has a follow-up question. How does our organization find a good web developer? Where to look? Mika, I would suggest that you look right there in our webinar chat. You can let folks know to contact you if you'd like, or the folks here at our hosting.com agency success. These are all agency folks who are working with clients. So anybody here might be a good candidate for you. Mika, you're welcome to join our agency success Slack group and reach out and just post your contact details there as well if you'd like, or they could direct message you in the Slack group. And that's at myagencysuccess.com. All right, we are way over here today, folks. Lots of great questions. Really hope this content was helpful for you and these thoughts about problem clients. That is going to wrap us up for today. We will have this recording up in a few days, just as quickly as we can get it through the post-production process. It'll be there for you. I would like to invite everybody to join us for office hours. That is every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And until then, have a great rest of the day. I'll see you back for office hours here on My Agency Success, where we go further together.